afternoon. Welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui, coming to you live from Beijing. The verdict is out. Mr. Bo Xilai has been found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. The disgraced former leader of Chongqing was convicted on all charges of bribery, embezzlement, and abuse of power. As the court case closes, the questions can begin.
Life imprisonment, confiscation of all personal assets, and deprivation of political rights for life.
The Jinan Intermediate People's Court has just delivered its verdict on Bo Xilai. Is the sentence fair or severe?
We must uphold the fighting of tigers and flies at the same time, resolutely investigating law-breaking cases of leading officials and also earnestly resolving the unhealthy tendencies and corruption problem.
President Xi Jinping has vowed to crack down on both tigers and flies involved in corruption. Will the bigger tigers escape? The government has launched a crackdown against false rumors spread online. But will it go too far? Should social media be allowed greater leeway to monitor officials? The Chinese leadership has shown great resolve to fight the plague of corruption in the country. With huge challenges ahead, will institutional reforms be introduced to address the problem? To answer those questions and discuss the implications of the case, I'm joined here by Professor He Jiahong with the Renmin University and Mr. Edward Lehman, Managing Director of Lehman, Lee & Xu law firm. With a British perspective, we are joined here by Mr. Andrew Fox, journalist and commentator. Welcome to our show.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Do you think Mr. Bo Xilai has got what he deserves?
I think it's very hard to answer your question at this moment because as a law professor, I'm not supposed to make comments on the factual issue and the evidence before the final judgment is announced. You know, at this moment, this is just the announcement of the first instant trial, and Bo Xilai has 10 days to consider whether he should appeal or not. If he appeals, then the case will go up to the High People's Court at the Shandong province. And in China, the trial of appeal is overall review of the whole case. Right. So not just the legal issues, but also the factual issues. So before the final judgment, I cannot make comments on the evidence and factual issues. But I can say that, you know, if the charges are all supported by reliable and sufficient evidence as found by the court, I think the judgment is reasonable.
But Bo Xilai had been very defined throughout the whole process during the trial, the open trial, right. I'm afraid, the most open in history of China's, yes. Legal history since the founding in 1949. What do you think of the consequences?
You know, again, I agree with Professor He that he's been found, well, at least he's been found guilty by this tribunal. Okay, so do I think it's open? Is it been as open as it possibly could be? The answer is yes, and I think that that's a huge step in the right direction. I think that the other thing to just concur with Professor He about, and which our viewers aren't aware of, is that an appeal process, if he does do that within the 10 days, then it's actually a second retrial, basically. It's different from the American process where it might be one single instance, he didn't have his rights, or he was tortured, or something happened, the evidence wasn't correct. So there's going to be a full-blown second trial, basically, if that happens. But I think it's a great step in the right direction for law and transparency. I think it's that the most powerful person or the weakest person has their day in court. Yes, he was defiant. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's good that he is putting on a rigorous defense. And the court didn't buy it. The court wasn't sympathetic to that defense and to his arguments. But I believe that at least those were heard, and those were heard by people in social media as well. And I think it's a good thing. It's a positive thing.
Yeah, I just like to put it in this way. So we have seen the procedural fairness in the trial, but for the substantive part, that's a decision of the judgment and the punishment. We have to wait and see the final judgment.
Well, Andrew, what do you think of this landmark event? Do you think this is a big step in the correct direction?
Well, of course, in the Western media, there's still a great deal of skepticism about the whole affair, because foreign journalists weren't allowed into the court during the trial. That's led to suspicions that even though the court posted proceedings on its microblog, that not all the proceedings were actually there to be seen, and that some sensitive information, some critical information was kept back. Those suspicions, that scepticism, will linger for a long time until the courts are independent of the government.
Well, that's a very British perspective. What do you think of the integrity of Chinese legal system?
I think that we still have a lot room to improve in future. But for this trial, I think it's quite good. It's better than I had expected. Some people said that even there were court record published through microblog, there might be a possibility that they were edited. I cannot rule out the possibility of addition of that. But I think after reading that, basically they are natural. Discussion, questioning, and answering.
Well, I mean, Professor
yeah.
Yang, I mean, it's in agreement, and to Andrew Fox's point is that, first of all, I don't always agree with foreign pundits that are saying that there were things that were edited and taken out. In any system, whether it's the British system or the American system, there are things of national importance that perhaps would be deleted or would not be totally and fully allowed. Those would be what we call in-camera review by the judge, and so that might not be made completely public. There are sensitive legal reasons why this wouldn't be all made to the public, and that happens in Western legal systems as well. We don't know if that's the case. I think the foreign pundits are focusing on the fact that they weren't able to enter the trial and be there the whole time. I still, with all that in mind, it's still difficult. When I go to a court, for example, I have to register ahead of time as a foreigner with a passport. But over my 26 years here, at least I can go into the court. At least I can register with the court. And so I think we're moving in the right direction. I think that the foreign pundits are focusing too much on saying this is a closed trial and that there are certain things that were edited.
Probably it's because they don't trust the Chinese legal system. They don't think the Chinese judiciary is independent enough.
I just wanted to point out one fact. Some people say this is just a play. But the trial started on Thursday, 22nd. I think people who made the decision may had thought the trial would last only 2 days. So started on Thursday, should finish on Friday. There is no sense to have the trial during the weekend. But in fact, Bo Xilai, the defendant, asked so many questions.
Right.
So it's extended the trial. So this is the proof that it is not just a play.
Or a rubber stamp. I agree with Professor Ho. I think that there was, what I thought was good was Bo Xilai is a very intelligent human being, put on a rigorous defense, and had a bunch of things. It wasn't just a rollover. So,
Andrew, what do you think of the rebuttals regarding Western skepticism?
Well, you can say until you're blue in the face that everything was fair and above board, but until the journalists are actually allowed in to see it for themselves, there's going to be that lingering skepticism, as I say. Of course, when it comes to matters of national security, then court hearings are held in camera, to use the legal jargon. In other words, they're held in private. But the reasons for that have to be explained first. To my knowledge, no part of these proceedings were actually held in camera. They were open to the people who were present, and national security was never cited once, that I'm aware of. So that obviously leads, from a Western perspective, from a Western media perspective, this lingering doubt about whether really it was a totally fair and honest trial.
But do you think it takes time for China to learn from the West in terms of how to improve the integrity and procedure justice?
I think the answer is yes, and I agree with Lehman, that we are on the right direction. So this case illustrates willingness and determination to promote the judiciary credit, even we don't use the term judicial independence in China. And so to publish the court record is really something. The transparency in this case is really great, and it has set a good example for future trials of the important or complicated cases in China.
Talking about independence of the judiciary, let's first look at the importance of or the role of the Central Commission for Disciplinary Inspection. Now, we have similar commissions on different levels of the government and the party, of course. Now, can you confirm that recently a decision has been made by the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection? Local commissions of the Inspection Commission should be only held responsible for the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection. They are no longer subject to the control of the local government. And that sort of a vertical independent command chain will be very meaningful for progress in improving China's legal integrity.
I think that's good for fighting corruption because
Can that be confirmed?
Yes. This has been calling in China for years. For fighting corruption, it's basically the interest of the central government. The leaders of the local government might not be so interested in the task of fighting corruption. They are more interested in economic development of the other things. So to make a more effective investigation of corrupt cases, it should be under the direct leadership. We call it vertical leadership of the investigative agencies. So disciplinary commission is one, and also more important is under the People's Procuratorate, the anti-corruption bureaus. We should also promote the vertical leadership of that.
Let's go back to the verdict itself of
Yeah.
Mr. Bo Xilai. What do you think of all personal assets being confiscated and his political rights are denied all his life? What does that mean for you?
Well, I mean, in America, having all your assets seized, I mean, for example, if someone's involved in the drugs trade, we have a far-reaching law that would seize everything that you might have acquired during the time that you were involved in this criminal activity. So this is not an unusual concept. Having political rights taken away from you, not an unusual political issue in the United States. If you're convicted of a felony, you then can no longer vote in the election. So these kind of things happen in the United States. I just want to take it back one step further, though, on this comment about public or not public. In Hong Kong, for example, one is not allowed to publish the transcripts of a trial. I want to be clear on this. So this is following the British system. You're not allowed to take the transcript and publish it. We've taken a step in this case. So I mean, the pundits can say whatever they want, but you can't take a trial transcript from a Hong Kong case and put it in the newspaper. They won't allow you to do it. And so what I'm saying is it's not so much where we are today. This is what Professor He and I have been saying is, it's how far have we come, even from the Chang Liangyu case in Shanghai, how far we've come over the 5 or 6 years since that case has taken place. And so, but I think the outcome is a good outcome. I think it's a good outcome in a lot of different directions, that there has been some level of transparency, which is remarkable. I think that the outcome of that rich people as well as other people can get a day at trial, and that a decision can be made. I mean, he was found for bribery, for embezzlement, and for abuse of power. And so for those three things, we got 3 separate sentences. One was life imprisonment, one was 15 years, and one was 7 years. But I think it sounds fair.
Well, the first chapter of Bo Xilai's trial has been flipped. Andrew, now we are waiting for the second chapter and the third chapter, and those chapters may have a lot more to do with other senior government officials. Let me go back to what Britain experienced in the 1980s. For example, you came from the Labour Party. What can we learn from the crackdown on corrupt party members in the Labour in the UK?
Yeah, I think there are lessons that the CPC can learn from the experiences of the Labour Party in the 1980s. At that time, the Labour Party was riddled with corrupt influences. Now, these were individuals who had infiltrated the party under the banner of militant tendency. They were a Trotskyist group, effectively, and realizing that they were not going to gain any electoral advantage or any influence within British politics, they decided to infiltrate the Labour Party instead, from a very top level to a very basic activist level. The Labour Party dealt with this by adopting a zero-tolerance approach. Once anyone who was a sympathiser of militant tendency was found, they were immediately expelled from the party. And that happened to members of Parliament, it happened to leaders of local authorities, not least Liverpool City Council, which were very powerful positions. And I think the CPC can say, well, let's look at that example. Let's decide, let's look closely at everyone within our party and decide whether they're at the very top or at the very bottom, the tigers or the flies, and get rid of them.
Yes, indeed, in the age of globalization, we have a lot to learn from how the West cracks down on corruption, and they also experienced the same stage of corruption. We are discussing the impact of the life imprisonment of Mr. Bo Xilai. He, of course, has the right to appeal, but when we come back, we'll examine other issues such as the role of the social media in supervising behavior and conduct of the government officials. So don't go away, we'll be right back.
Life imprisonment, confiscation of all personal assets, and deprivation of political rights for life.
The Jinan Intermediate People's Court has just delivered its verdict on Bo Xilai. Is the sentence fair or severe?
We must uphold the fighting of tigers and flies at the same time, resolutely investigating law-breaking cases of leading officials and also earnestly resolving the unhealthy tendencies and corruption problem.
President Xi Jinping has vowed to crack down on both tigers and flies involved in corruption. Will the bigger tigers escape? The government has launched a crackdown against false rumors spread online. But will it go too far? Should social media be allowed greater leeway to monitor officials? The Chinese leadership has shown great resolve to fight the plague of corruption in the country. With huge challenges ahead, will institutional reforms be introduced to address the problem? Welcome back. Now, Professor He, what do you think of confiscating all the personal assets of Bo Xilai? What does that mean for our overseas viewers who may not have a complete understanding about the Chinese situation here?
I think, in fact, that is not very important for Bo Xilai. Probably more important is that all his political life are deprived for the whole life. That means the announcement of his civil death, right? That's the word. Yeah, that the end of his political life.
He's never able to make a comeback politically.
Yeah. So in this sense,
his fate is sealed, by the way.
Right. You know, for his punishment, that the bench has some options, you know, including the life imprisonment that is now, and also maybe 20 years imprisonment, or maybe the death penalty with 2 years suspension. But that does not make a big difference for him, you know. So for him, more important, I think, that is the end of the political life.
The end of political life means the death penalty for people like him, perhaps. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, no, taking away his assets, I think that for the public, that it's not important necessarily for him personally taking those assets away. He'll be living in prison, so I mean, his French villa will not be of use of it for him. However, I think that it's a very good signal to the public. People have a hard time buying a home here in Beijing, and for someone who's a government official to have a villa in France is shocking. And so to be able to take this away from them, I think, is a very good example, and it shows a good sign to the Chinese public that they're taking these assets away.
Now, gentlemen, in the first part of our program, we've been discussing the importance of having vertical leadership for commissions of discipline inspection. Now let's look at the importance of democracy. Millions of liberals and fans of democracy, I mean Western democracy here in China, argue strongly that democracy is definitely the shock therapy for eliminating all forms of corruption. Now, Edward laughs. What do you think of this idea? I mean, is it the most effective therapy to have a democracy?
I think it's impossible to get rid of all the corruption, so even you have a high degree of democracy. Of course, for fighting corruption or preventing corruption, democracy is quite effective. And
because they have the opposition party, they have the independence of the media,
right,
and the judiciary.
They have the supervision.
Therefore, the mechanism itself proves very effective.
Yeah, in my opinion,
that's the argument of a majority of those who support the democracy and the rule of law in the democratic country.
Yeah, I think that is good for preventing corruption at a high-ranking government. You know, but for the low-ranking government, I think more important is the rule of law. You know, if everybody abide by the law, have the habit of behavior to abide by the law, and that's more important to get rid of the corruption at the grassroots level.
I mean, the reason why I laughed is because democracy, right, does not necessarily solve corruption. It does, like you said, it creates a system of checks and balances. Remember, in my lifetime, Spiro Agnew, who was Richard Nixon's vice president, had to resign, signed no contest to corruption while he was governor of Maryland, but he actually just stepped down from the vice presidency. In my lifetime, we've had 4 Illinois governors where I come from that have gone to prison. 2 are in prison today. One was a sitting 7th Circuit judge, which is a very, very high position. They arrested him while he was on the bench. So these things will continue to happen. You know, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I don't know if it was Thomas Jefferson who said that, but the issue is it's always going to be there with power. When there's power, there's going to be corruption. And the democracy helps with a system of checks and balances. And I think these new measures the government have taken are a step in the right direction, but it's going to take time to implement these.
Yeah, I just want to add one footnote for this. You know, last week I was in London to attend the international conference on anti-corruption.
What did you hear there?
A lot of speakers, that's from UK, you know, they complained the problem of corruption in UK government. UK is very democratic state, I think, you know, but they still have a very serious problem of corruption there.
Andrew, do you have any British laws that prevent former government officials from engaging in business activities? For example, in the United States, we have the revolving door game that enable former government officials to do business, and therefore they can have a lot of 关系 in Chinese. It means high-ranking connections with the government so that they can win contracts and orders. Do you have similar British? Do you have any British laws that prevent such sort of activities?
The only law that exists prevents a government minister or indeed a senior civil servant leaving their post and heading straight to the boardroom of a very top company or an influential company. So they can't, there's no revolving door, but they have to wait. I think the period is less than a year or around a year, and then they can accept invitations to join the boards of various groups or companies, as indeed Tony Blair has famously done, as indeed Peter Mandelson has done, former EU Trade Commissioner.
Now, Edward, why do you think revolving door games are legitimate in your country? I mean, in China, that's absolutely incredible.
It is. I mean, it's a system that's been around for many, many years. I mean, the term lobbyist, actually, which is what this revolving door is, which means that you go from being a government official to someone who is trying to influence government officials. And the term lobbyist actually comes from a hotel that is across from the White House or across from the Capitol building, where in Ulysses Grant's time, these people would hang in the lobby to try to get the ear of government officers. And so it's embedded in our system. They've done things to try to have anti-corruption where influence cannot be shown in a certain way. But it's a part of our system, a part of our so-called democracy, and wherever we have politicians, we have lobbyists and former government officials that join and make money.
Most of our questions today focus on the construction of a healthy mechanism that prevents, hopefully, government officials from conducting corrupt activities. Now, both case and inquiry into Jiang Zemin and other senior government officials have raised prospects about mechanism for promoting government officials. Is there a way of ensuring that people prone to corruption are never put in positions of influence or responsibility? And what do you think of the idea of having more strident auditing? Because Jiang Zemin was exposed after an audit of his finances.
I think that's just a very important part of the problem of corruption in China, how to promote officials. Because when you get into that career, you would always want to be promoted. So in China, we have seen many people would bribe for the promotion. Since I'm not only a jurist but also a novelist, I would have novel ideas for that. I made one invention. Is
Fact or fiction? We got to be very careful about that.
Based on facts, but it's a fiction, because we should use computer to make the decision to promote public officials in one way or the other. If we can use that, because if you give the discretion to the public officials at higher power, there might be corrupted. But if we use computer to make assessment, what you have done as a very good journalist,
Excuse me, we are not living in the world of virtuality. But
okay.
Andrew, in Britain, what do you do? I mean, Before 1997, I heard there was something like a ICAC, a very independent watchdog.
Yes, but perhaps there's a lesson there to be learned by the CPC as well. The Independent Commission Against Corruption was set up before the Hong Kong territory was handed back to China. And that rooted out all sort of corruption, not just at the top, but at the very bottom as well. Because in the 70s, 80s, corruption was systemic in Hong Kong. For example, if you were in hospital, you'd have to pay a bribe before you get a bedpan. Even to get to hospital, you might have to pay a bribe to the ambulance worker to take you to hospital. So something obviously had to be done. And indeed, police chiefs were also found guilty of corruption. So an independent commission, independent of the government, was set up to make sure the law was enforced and corruption was cut out.
Edward, independence is a sensitive word, but it's such an important virtue for maintaining integrity of the government and of public services. So what do you think of a construction of a mechanism? What are your suggestions if you were to be asked and approached by someone from the Supreme People's Court and from the Central Commission of the Discipline Inspection?
Well, I mean, there has to be a system of checks and balances with anything that's so-called independent. So to create an independent structure in and of itself that is an ivory tower is almost an impossibility. And the independence, what I believe, obviously, I think the Hong Kong, as Andrew Fox said, the Commission Against Corruption has worked extremely well. But I think it also has to work together in cooperation with the legal system as a matter of checks and balances, and and the legislature, which is going to be writing these rules and regulations. But that's where China has to be. China has to have an independent system where it's transparent, which you understand what is corruption, what is not corruption.
By the end of this very interesting program, gentlemen, what do you think of the importance of social media? I mentioned it during the break, before the break, but we don't have enough time. But what's your expectation?
I think social media is very important for fighting corruption and also for supervising the government. And this is a developing trend in the whole world. Just one thing, the day before yesterday, I published an article on my blog, not a macro blog. I don't have that. And I have been read it for more than 1 million.
Yeah, so you had 1.3 million hits on the blog.
Oh, really?
On this
that's
topic.
really something, because I was talking about Bo Xilai, so the timing is important. So this is the influence of social media.
But it's nice. I mean, Professor He is obviously an expert in this area. What's a problem is the guys who are not experts giving opinions on it.
But it was put at the headline by Phoenix.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We thank you very much for your participation in this meaningful discussion about the rule of law in China. But perhaps this is just the first step in the correct direction. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.